Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called The Survivor, written by Alex Sylvian. Daniel left just after dawn. He didn't want to, but he knew he had to. He left the blackened corpses of his family behind. He left the burning husk of the airplane behind. He left behind the warmth and comparative safety of the burning wreck. He knew he might die if he left, but he also knew nobody was coming. He would definitely die if he stayed. So he went. He was the only survivor of the plane crash, having been miraculously ejected when the plane split in two. All he had were his clothes, his broken phone, and his watch. Luckily for him, he was wearing a hoodie. Unluckily for him, it was soaked in gas. The frozen forests of Poland are rarely forgiving. It had been so hard for him to leave his parents behind. He had cried a whole lot. His eyes were red with pain and tears. But he had to leave. They're dead, them behind. There was no food, no water. Perhaps emotionally he still couldn't have been able to leave. But the strongest human weapon had been applied to him. A weapon passed down for thousands of years, from survivor to survivor to survivor. The voice that said, "Survive." He decided to walk east, no particular reason. That had been the direction the plane was going. Half-remembered recollections told him to need food to live, water, a stream, then he could follow it to civilization. He stumbled along a dark and ceaseless forest. He knew that he was in Poland from when the plane went down, but had no more information than that. He ignored the hunger pangs in his stomach. He ignored the mushrooms and plants he saw by the wayside. He was no botanist. They were all probably poisonous. He walked for miles and miles. He walked through frozen trees and treacherous flora, but no water and no food. His stomach shouted at him. He was just a regular American citizen. He was used to 3 square meals. He was not used to walking 12 miles in a day on no food. But survive. He did his best. He could. He had to. At the end of the first day, just the light was beginning to dim, he heard the first howl. A wolf in the distance. Daniel shivered. He still had a light to fire, but how? Some hazy movie came to his mind. The sun was shining through the cold clearing. He could use the sun. He gathered up some branches and timber, small ones and large ones, piled them up in a small heap. He gathered up more wood. Soon he had a tinderbox, though he didn't know it was called that. He took off his glasses, held them up in the sky, focused the sun's rays through the lens, waited. Oh, please, catch fire. Catch fire. I'm going to die if it doesn't catch fire. For a fight to start. Nothing. He screamed. Tears came to his eyes. If he didn't light the fire before the sun went down, it was likely he'd never see another sunrise. A tear fell on the ground. And just like that, an idea. Water. Water as a focus came to him. He spat onto the glasses, smeared it onto his shirt. Tried the sun trick again. It took a couple minutes, but it worked. Soon he had a roaring fire. He curled around himself into a tiny ball and went to sleep. The howling woke him up. The faintest traces of dawn were in the sky, and a dozen pairs of eyes were staring at him from the trees. Wolves, a pack. He saw teeth and tongues slavering in the dark. Definitely can't fight. He'd be torn apart. Only one option. Climb. The wolves were keeping back because of the fire, but it wouldn't scare them forever. It's a cedar wood, cedar that burns well, tree, that sturdy-looking branches right up there. Up. He remembered something from a book. First, take off your shirt. Nothing's better for climbing than bare skin. He put all his upper clothing into his hoodie and tied it around his waist. He climbed. It wasn't the most difficult climb of his life. Fear is a great motivator. He settled on a branch, put his clothes back on, waited for the sun. Daniel spent the rest of the night in the tree, but the wolves weren't going away. So he made a decision. Started throwing down bits of branches, hit the face, that was a weak spot, that's always a weak spot, at the wolves. Hit one right in the eye. It yelped. The pack loped away and left. An hour later, Daniel dropped out of the tree and took a tough, thin branch with him. He needed a weapon. Started carving it into a spear/walking stick with a sharp rock. Had to be ready to survive, defend himself. He came to a river on that day. He almost fell in it. He cried again. He drank like a dying man. Maybe he was one. He drank greedily, letting the water run down his neck, mixing with the gasoline that was already on his hoodie. He drank for a long time. He wondered how to transport it. Then he decided it didn't matter. He would just follow the river, after all. So, after a long break, he started walking again. It was much harder than the previous day. Charlie horsed legs, everything hurt, but he kept walking anyway. He had to. But he walked for hours with nothing to show for it. He finished his spear, at least. With a final dash of red. Those are sparks. That's important to remember that. He had a possible weapon. Soon he saw the night coming on. Time to stop for the night. So hungry, ravenous, no food, no idea how to catch fish. With a furious stomach, Daniel settled to make a tinderbox again. It was easier this time. He was just pulling out grasses when he saw it. The lone wolf. He saw it before it howled, separated from its pack. He knew right away that it was one he had struck with the branch before. There was a wound in its eye. It stared at him with an expression that was far worse than hatred. It howled. Then it charged. Daniel managed. No time to climb. Don't freeze. Protect yourself. To get the spear in the way in time, the wolf paused. They circled each other. Longer. 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 What seemed like hours passed. Finally, hunger overcame the wolf's instincts. It charged at him, howling and screaming. Daniel got it in the shoulder, but it wasn't enough. The wolf struggled, tore the spear out of Daniel's grip. It fell to the side. He raised his hands to protect himself. Mistake. The wolf rewarded his mistake by chomping down on his hand. Pain. Pain unlike anything Daniel had ever felt rushed through his body. He screamed and tore his hand free. His hand was 3 fingers lighter now. Blood poured from his dismembered hand. No time to focus on that. The wolf reared up and pounced on him. 200 pounds of ravenous wild beast bore him to the ground. Teeth snapped at his throat, bursting with adrenaline. Daniel put both his hands in the animal's throat and pushed with all his might. It wasn't enough. He was just managing to keep the wolf from his throat. But he was getting weaker. His grip was getting softer. His arms were sore and tired, and he hadn't eaten in 2 days. And unbidden, a thought rose up in Daniel's mind, sure as panic set in. I can't do this. I'm going to die. I can't do this. I'm going to die. Survive! Survive! Daniel stopped trying to fend off the wolf with his right hand and screamed again as he felt the wolf's teeth sink deep into his left, the maimed one. But he grabbed the wolf's stomach with the right hand. Like a fur coat, just like a fur coat. If I live through this, I'm never touching fur again. And flipped backwards, using the wolf's forward momentum against it. He heard the fleeting memory of Mescalp explaining how a lever worked, and then he was on top of the wolf. The wolf howled in anger and confusion. Daniel screamed back in pain and frustration, and he grabbed the discarded spear from the ground. And with a single guttural shriek, he plunged it into the wolf's throat. The wolf roared. Daniel didn't care. He plunged the stick down again and again and die again and again until finally he collapsed beside the wolf's corpse, utterly exhausted. He wanted to lie there for 1,000 years, but he couldn't. He had to disinfect his hand. Down to the river, washed the wounds, nothing to stop the bleeding with. Sustained it in his shirt. Not good enough for the fingers. Felt like they would never stop bleeding. Felt a little shock, woozy. Needed a survive fire. Too late to do the lens trick again. It was already dark. No sun for him. How to light a woodpile. He turned back to saw a spark before, spear. Pulled it out of the wolf and started carving pieces again and saw a couple sparks. Not nearly enough to light the wood. No good. He tore off the gasoline-soaked hoodie, threw it onto the tinderbox, carved out another cinder, hard to do with only 7 fingers. But soon, success, sparks, flames, heat, relief. Now came the hard part. He put a piece of bark in his mouth and put down hard, plunged his torn hand into the fire. A muffled scream rebounded through the forest, but he kept his hand. You need to survive this. Steady. 10 seconds, 20 seconds. He pulled the hand out and plunged it into his wet shirt. The bleeding stopped. Daniel spat out the bark and closed his eyes. Almost done. He sat down by the fire and tried to sleep, but his stomach refused. He, eat or die, needed some food, and there was only one choice: eat the wolf. He carved out a piece of its guts with a spear, impaled it on the stick, and roasted it on the fire. For a moment he was repulsed by the meat, but then survived. He did what he had to do. When his stomach stopped protesting, he drifted off into a dark and undisturbed sleep. The next day, he sat up with the first light, followed the river again. He followed it for hours. The cold didn't seem to bother him anymore. The ends of his fingers and toes were numb, frostbite. But he didn't seem to find the energy to care. His clothes were covered in blood. He knew that this was his last day left. So he trudged, looking like a dead man had learned to walk. And that's how he looked when he finally wandered out of the forest and into a small town. A woman walking in the street saw him and jumped. She ran over to him, face full of concern. She called out loudly to someone out of view. Then she said to him, slowly, comfortably, "Next scene there, just?" "Yak, say, $2. Daniel's face, stretched out and fierce for so long, broke out in a smile. He said, "I have no idea what that means." And his legs and his mind, carrying so much weight for the past 3 days, finally allowed themselves to pass out. He fell to the ground, a grin on his face. He looked up at the sky. He heard concerned shouting near him. He felt tears in his eyes. Finally, time to mourn. The world went dark around him. Time to rest. And a voice, used to being quiet, returned to silence again. It had served its purpose. He had survived. But the voice laid in wait, as it does in every human. That voice was once present in every life, is quiet now. But just because it's quiet doesn't mean it isn't there. End of story. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Bushmaster 177, Henry the Red, Caspar Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon WRE, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.